stop this from happening. So I want to make you, as inspectors or installers, aware that it's happening, and we want to stop that from happening. However, it was a technology situation where basically we just got to get those couple extra pieces added to prevent that from happening. So keep it in mind, there's your caveat. You do an inspection, that could have happened. Yeah.
Why don't you just get rid of the timer?
Timer staying.
Huh?
Timer staying with state rules too.
Oh, so the state rules, is that?
Timer staying on the state rules too. Yeah.
Okay. So your folks will
Yeah. Demand.
always give you the right dose, and your counter will tell you how many gallons it's working. Why particular doesn't have to go off every 4 hours.
Right. What Jim's talking about is demand dosing, and here's the philosophy. The state is included in their draft, which we'll go over. Mounds, many of you in this room said to me, "Oh, they're going to fail. They're junk." Well, they worked. However, we don't want to give the technology a black eye, and we know that this is the best way to do it over demand dosing, and you control what goes into that mound much better. So, we were a touch skeptical as you were, and we wanted to make sure we did all we could to prevent that. And many of you put aerators in front of these mounds, which is your prerogative. But I know that there are many who were hesitant to use them. All the ones have functioned, maybe with the exception of if water was being directed toward them, that would cause them to fail. They've worked, and we wanted to make sure that it was done to prevent any problems in the future. And the state has taken that same approach. We'll talk about it later. LPP and mounds are going to be time dosed. So,
if you weren't here last time, this is the sanitarium map of who has what area. If you guys need that, I'm not sure if it's online or not, but if so, I can get you a copy of that, email it to you. It's no big deal. Did you want to talk about that real quick? Make sure, I went over last time, distribution boxes, if they're collapsing, make sure you note that, or deteriorated. This is where we see some sludge in the line. Another thing, I know some confusion about outlet tees, outlet baffles, what that is. This is what I mean, excuse me, in the property transfer inspection form. When I mention outlet tee, outlet baffle, I mean this here, not this. So a lot of you do see hanging baffles inside these tanks. But what I'm looking at are these here that are concrete baffles around, and a lot of them are rotted off. Here's a plastic one around, and then that one, you can see where it's all pretty much rotted off. The whole top portion of it has, and the bottom probably has also. And then you just replace it. This one used to have the concrete, and they just replaced it with the plastic. So that's what I mean when I talk about outlet tees, outlet baffles on my transfer inspection forms. So that's what I want to see. Leach lines, filter bits. If you have questions about that, you can talk to me more about that. We won't talk about that. Hydraulic loading of aerobic treatment units. I still see some come in. Where I want to see the loading of aerators is not from the house. It's going to have to go into a lift station or a distribution box because we don't want to run. I talked to some of the service providers here, some of the providers of those units, and they say they don't want you slugging 180 plus gallons of water through those units. It's just not good for the unit. So anytime you hydraulically load for property transfer, run some water through just to make sure there's no crack, in the foundation wall where it's leaking into a footer. But run some water where it goes through. You can actually see it move through. But the majority of the water needs to go through a hose to either the distribution box or a lift station. Questions on that? We have some inspectors that email pictures. Pictures explain a lot. So if you want to email me pictures along with the inspection form, that's fine. That way, especially if you have questions about the area, I'm able to see what you're seeing in the field. So if you have pictures about a problem or a questionable thing, go ahead and email them to me. That way I have them and I can keep them with the file and go from there. Make sure you're doing the property transfer inspections accurate. just don't go off. If Kathy submits one from a former inspection, 2 years ago or a year ago, make sure you're not just copying stuff over. Make sure you're checking stuff too. Field verify what they did. If they did something wrong, then we can go, look into that. But make sure you're just not willy-nilly just putting stuff down that you haven't verified. Pre-77 aerobic treatment units, that's one where, this is way back in Laura's day, where there's no code for those back then, so we want a sample for E. coli to check for nuisance. If there is too high of E. coli, then that will probably fail at that point. Most of those units from that era haven't been maintained very well, and they're just falling apart anyway, so they mostly get replaced at that point anyway. Okay, and once again, if I have an email address for you at all possible, I will email you, and then you're the one responsible to distribute that to everybody else. I mean, if they call, I have no problem sending it out. It's already scanned in. Property transfer form, I don't have any revisions this time. There was a revision in September. Does anybody have questions about those revisions of the September report? Invoicing, Courtney continues to invoice you guys. Make sure you pay them, because we do keep track. If you get too far behind, we will stop submitting, or we'll stop reviewing those transfer inspections until you're paid up. Go ahead.
Are the fees remaining the same as coming year? For
$25?
They're the same. Yes. All right, for those of you who attended, there was a week or two ago over at Mercy Health over there at Jackson Township, the Ohio Department of Health put on a program on all the changes that are upcoming here from the draft rules. Again, this is draft, so things can still change. I'm going to apologize up front because I just told her, hey, give me a copy of that so I don't have to redo it. And this is basically a reiteration of what the state went over. I'm going to add a few things that she kind of glossed over from the state health department that may be of interest to you that maybe you didn't pick up on there. So those of you who attended that, it's going to be much the same material. I did cut about 14 slides out because there were just some things that most of you are not going to be interested in. So anyway, she went over a bit of history, and many of you are aware of this history, but just for the sake of kind of keeping you up to date and knowing where we're coming from, let me go over this. 1977 was when the original Ohio State Sanitary Sewage Code was adopted. In 2005, that third bullet down there, state law established some guidance and then enabled Ohio Department of Health to adopt rules. So if you're not familiar with how the legislature works, what they do is they adopt laws, which is a framework for rules that are adopted under administrative agency. So 2005. Here we are, 8 years later, still trying to get these rules to work in 2005. So as you well know, most of you, in 2007, there was a rule package that came out. In 6 months it was gone because of economic and political pressures that were at that time. So you fast forward, they were required, in the last bullet there, they were required to adopt rules no earlier than January 1st, 2012. Certainly they did that. So what has happened in the meantime to adopt what we're going to talk about today is in October 2010, many organizations got together and began discussing what should be included in these rules. It was a very broad, and I'll show you the list here shortly. It was a broad-reaching group of people, and they were trying to reach consensus. And you know how difficult that is to reach consensus. If you take just local health departments and you take the Northeast Ohio, compare it to the South or to the Central, you get a wide range of opinions on how things ought to be done, just simply probably because of your demographic and some of your local conditions. So it isn't easy to come to consensus on this stuff, and that's why 2007 flopped, I'm sure. So this has been going on since December 2010 through October 2012. These meetings were taking place. And here's a list of all the people that were involved in trying to develop this rule package. And you'll see quite a large group here. Certainly these meetings were open and everybody could make comment along the way. Much of this was posted on the web so that people could see what was being developed. So it was as transparent as they could make it. So where are we at today with draft and comment periods? Ohio Department of Health put out a, I guess, lack of a better word, informal comment period in December 2012. So last year, they put a rule package out and said, hey, give us comments on what you're seeing here. And through that period of time, they collected, you see number 3 there, 2,100 comments from the industry about the rule package. So we are now at a second draft, and I think we've discussed with you in the past what that rule package looked like. It has changed, and the comments have been put into the package. And in my personal opinion, they've done a pretty decent job considering what they have to work with to try to pull this thing off. So now we're at the second draft of those rules. Much of it's been reformatted and so forth. So let me tell you, now that's the past. Now let me tell you where we're at right now with how we figure that things are going to be adopted out into the future. So November 2013, last month, the second draft came out. And there's a 60-day review process that takes place in the Common Sense Initiative. That's basically to say, what is the economic impact? This is something that happens at the state government level. What's the economic impact? Does this make common sense for us to move forward with this rule as it's written? There's an official 30-day comment period, which is just about done at this point. Then also a period of time where it goes before the Ohio Public Health Advisory Board. That board then makes recommendations and comments to the Director of Health, and then any changes that are made. Finally, in January 2014, it'll go before a committee called JCAR, Joint Committee on Agency Rule Review, I believe is what that stands for. What that basically does is say, the legislature gave you a framework to work within. Did you go outside the framework? Did you go outside the boundary? And some of the things that we'll talk about today are the reason why you don't see certain things happening here is because they didn't want to go outside the boundary. Administrative agencies are not allowed to write rules outside of what the legislature permits you to write. You're allowed to put details in, but you're not allowed to go outside of what the legislature intended. So that's what that committee does. So finally, number 6 there, we are, as of right now, expecting a possible effective date around April or May of 2014 once it goes through all that red tape and bureaucracy. So any questions about the history or the adoption process of these rules? Okay. They did reformat it, like I said. They added a low pressure distribution rule. They actually moved a lot of the specifics about system design to an appendice at the end. So leaching trenches, mound systems, drip distribution, sand fillers, engineered drainage. That's when you're draining your site to try to decrease the seasonal perch water table. All that's in an appendice. It's not spelled out in the central part of the rules. They also added greywater recycling systems. If you recall, many of you might have remembered that when I introduced this package previously, the first draft, there was a very short section on greywater recycling. I believe it said no more than 60 gallons per day, period. And that was all they did with it. Well, apparently they must have been chastised because they broadly expanded this. And we'll get into some of this. Greywater systems is coming. Now, what this is alluding to is not the tank in the house that you're going to recirculate through your toilet. It went through your sink and now it's going into your toilet. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about irrigation more than anything on your property, watering plants and whatnot. So that is appearing to be coming out in much broader range than what was originally designed. Spray irrigation has been entirely removed. And my personal view was that it wasn't the answer, but it was another tool that we could have used in many sites. They removed it, but I asked them, okay, what are we going to? You removed it. What's going to happen to this technology? Well, apparently they're going to do it like they've done many other technologies in the past.